Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, we continue the Summer of the Wolf by painting Arjac Rockfist. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, you and I continue the Summer of the Wolf with our 5th episode in which we paint Arjac Rockfist. But first, I want to talk very briefly about camping in Japan. Now, much like the rest of the world, camping is very much a thing here in Japan and is enjoyed yearly by millions of residents. Even in a massive metropolitan area such as Tokyo, which is home to over 37 million people, a short hour-and-a-half drive outside of the city center will find you very quickly deep within the mountains that surround the city. Japan is, after all, a volcanic archipelago, and there are no shortage of massive and sudden mountain ranges on the islands. Now, as with many other countries, there are varying levels of camping, from roughing it in the deep wilderness all the way up to what we now call glamping in modern-style resort campgrounds. Now, the one major difference when it comes to camping in Japan is that, unlike America, where most camping is done in a trailer or RV, in Japan, no one has the parking space for something like that. You can barely afford the space to park a small economic car on your property, let alone an additional 15 or 20 foot trailer that you'll only use a few times a year. So tent camping is the most common form of camping in Japan. And as such, it is very common to find small, secluded, but nicely appointed campgrounds designed for tent camping with communal showers and common areas. The other thing that the Japanese do a little bit differently about camping is the thing that they do a little bit different about everything else is that you don't do it unless you're completely geared out. So if someone in Japan is intending on going camping, they sort of splash out and go to the local equivalent of an REI and buy absolutely everything. In another video, we'll go into detail about Japan's sort of obsessive need to accessorize with all the appropriate gear in order to do the simplest activity. Well, that's enough about camping in Japan and enjoying the great outdoors. Let's talk about Arjac Rockfist. This is another incredible model in the range refresh for the Space Wolves, and like Logan Grimnar last week and the Head Takers and Wolfguard Battle Leader before that, I was really excited to build and paint this model for our growing Space Wolves force. So let me show you how I built and painted Arjac Rockfist. I've been looking forward to building and painting this model since it was announced. The old Firstborn Arjac was one of my favorite sculpts of that era, and I'm excited to put this guy together. Now, you can build him one of two ways, holding the hammer or throwing the hammer. And we're going to build him holding the hammer for a couple reasons. One of which is it'd be a little trickier to store and transport him safely with the hammer extended like that. And the other reason we'll talk a little bit about later in the video. Now, of course, we're going to assemble the model with Tamiya Thin. The brush applicator allows us to put the glue exactly where we need it. These kits are exceptionally well engineered and go together without any hassle whatsoever until you get to the point where you have to connect the arms. Now, the right arm that's holding the shield, no problem. There's a really good peg there, and when you place the arm, there's no wrong way to do it. When we come to the left arm that wields the hammer, for whatever reason, there's this tiny little ridge that doesn't really hold the arm in placing. It can be a bit tricky to get the proper pose. He stands on a very small tactical rock that comes with these sort of guts and rib cage attached. We don't want those. I don't need a rib cage on my base. So we're going to go ahead and carefully score that and cut it away with the clippers. And then what we'll do is just bend the plastic and it will snap off where we've made the weak points. We'll go through and clean that up with our hobby knife. Once we've got that on our base, you'll never be able to tell that there was anything else there. I base all of my Space Wolves on these really great Grey Tide Studios resin-based toppers, but the problem is that when it comes to these hero figures, the sculptural elements can get in the way. Fortunately, the files also include a ton of basing bits so that you can create your own bases in your 3D application of choice. Here I'm using 3D Builder, the free 3D software from Windows 10, to put together the bits to make my own 50mm topper. We'll send that to the 3D printer, resin print that base, and an hour later, we're ready to go. Until I realized the two don't really match. The jagged rocks look out of place here, so we're going to ditch those and make our own. His lead foot is at a bit of an angle here and there's a peg, so we need to use a protractor to measure that angle to make sure that we're tilting our parts the way they need to be to replace that tactical rock that was included. We'll print that out, superglue it to the base, and then hold it in place with some dollar store clamps. I'll use my single-sided nippers to slice off the majority of the peg, and then I'll clean it up with my hobby knife and some sanding sticks. Later, we'll be able to superglue that to the base. It's time to prime. I've glued the model to a temporary base so that I don't have to handle it while I'm painting it in a subassembly. We'll use black polyurethane primer through the airbrush. It makes a perfect satin coat on the model. And we've got a few sub-assemblies here. It's a character model, so we're going to give it some extra attention. On the rank and file terminators and things like that, you don't have to go to this level of trouble. Once we've got all of our black primes down, we're going to go ahead and move to a zenithal prime. I'm going to use a white primer. I'm going to apply that from the top down. And what that's going to do is start describing all of the shapes of the model for us. But also, it's going to make the shadows darker and the highlights brighter. Because when we put paint on top of this, the paint will react according to what is underneath it. Next, we're going to apply our shadow value to the armor. This is Somber Gray from Vallejo, but you can also use the Fang from Games Workshop. And we're going to spray that from underneath. This is a darker blue-gray, a bit desaturated. It's going to exaggerate the shadows. And then from on top, our special sauce. This is 1 part Vallejo Electric Blue and 5 parts Fenrisian Gray. We'll put that through the airbrush, and then a final top-down only highlight of just Fenrisian Gray to create sort of like the illusion of sunlight hitting the armor and really rounding out those shapes. Now once that's dry, we're going to apply our wash. This is contrast Space Wolves Gray mixed 2-to-1 with medium. So that's 2 drops of medium, 1 drop of Space Wolves Gray. You'll see that it flows across the model really smoothly and cleanly, pulls away from the high spots and goes into the recesses to help describe our details. You apply this all over the model, but you want to work panel by panel so that it doesn't dry on you and you get those tide marks. You can see here on the shield, it just works perfectly. It settles right into the recesses, starts describing all of those shapes. Now, on the rank and file, you're good to go. Just leave it like this, move on to the details, but because this is a character model, we're going to use some pure Fenrisian Gray to pull those highlights out again on the uppermost edges of the armor. Once that's dry, I'm going to take that Space Wolves Contrast Gray, put it in the airbrush, and I'm just going to put a small shadow gradient along the bottom of the greaves, the bottom of this pauldron here, and then under the ribs on the sides. We'll do a final hit on the back edge of the Terminator's armor to sort of exaggerate that curve that goes around there. Now next, I'm going to move through and sponge chip the armor. This is just Vallejo Burnt Umber on a sponge, and too much there, right? But not a problem. While the paint is wet, just get some water on your brush, wick it away, and you'll be able to clean up anything that's a little too much. Sponge chipping is a lot of fun, and those little mistakes that happen, they're no problem. You can clean them up. It's easy to put too much on those, so use some restraint, especially on Arjac as his armor's already banged up. Now I'm going to use lead belcher to paint all my silver metallics here, things like the power cabling, the hammer, and the inside of the shield. We'll use Army Painter Deep Gray on the soft seals and joints of the armor. And then we'll use Army Painter Dark Tone in order to shade all of our metallics that we had just finished. This is really great because it sort of stays in place where you put it. It doesn't run like Nuln Oil does. Now we'll put that on the hammer there to bring out the details, but we've got something special to work on later. Now with our silvers done, it's time to put down our golds, or in this case our bronzes. One of the signatures of my army is that there are no bright golds anywhere. They're all sort of bronzes and copper colors. So here I'm using Balthazar Gold from Games Workshop. That's my base. I'm going to go ahead and apply that anywhere where there's this trim or ornamentation. And then we're going to use a Athonian Camo Shade to shade this. This is a wash from Games Workshop. It is green, so what that does is we'll apply 2 coats. 1 coat, let it dry, apply your 2nd coat, and you get this patina effect that you would expect to see on bronze or copper. We'll do that on the iron halo, and then we'll move on to the details on the hammer. Here, I'm using electric blue, and we're just going to paint around the letter shapes. We're trying to create a subtle glow here. We'll hit this again later on. Now, while we have our electric blue out, we're going to go ahead and hit these electrodes that are on the inside of the shield. It's just a small detail. And we'll move on to this pauldron. I hate these. I hate painting these sculpted little things. I honestly thought about shaving it off and just applying a decal, but instead I did paint it. It took me like 30 minutes. It's just ridiculous. While we have our white out though, we'll go ahead and hit the tips of all of those electric nodes on the gauntlet, on the shield, and then we'll water it down. And then we're just going to use our 000 brush, and we're going to put that into the recesses. This is going to finish the glow effect. Makes it look like the runes are crackling with energy. Now we'll go ahead and glue on the right pauldron. It's a little bit finicky, but it does snap into place. And then we'll put the shield on next. Yes, I almost put the shield on first instead of the pauldron. That would have been its own nightmare, but thankfully I caught myself at the last second. Once we have the model put together to this point, we'll go through and touch up all of our bronze colors. I'm using Canoptic Alloy. This is a paint from Games Workshop. It's a silver, but it has the slightest warm tint to it, so it's great for these bronze colors. I've used a contrast paint on the haft of the hammer. This is Contrast Wildwood. Once that's dry, we'll take Mournfang Brown and a detail brush. We'll get in there and highlight each of the straps in the handle. Moving on to the next sub-assembly, this is the blacksmith's apron that Arjac wears. So I'm going to use my leather recipe. This is Burnt Umber from Vallejo. We'll apply that with the airbrush just to get it done really quickly. And then we'll take Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop. We'll dry brush that on. It's like a warm, creamy brown. And as a final step, we'll dry brush Kislev Flesh on top of that. That's going to hit only the high points, and we're going to do really scratchy sort of motions with the brush to mimic the micro scratches that would happen in a leather apron. Now, all leathers are not the same, so we're going to go ahead and take Beastie Brown from Vallejo, and we'll paint his belt with that, being careful not to get anything on the apron. Being a blacksmith, he also has a few tools of the trade hanging off of his belt here. So we'll go ahead and use Lead Belcher in order to paint our metallics using our detail brush. Once we've got that done, we're going to go ahead and shade the belt with Agrac's Earthshade. Again, this is to set it apart from the leather of the apron. And then we're going to use some Nuln Oil to shade the tools, let that flow into the recesses and bring out the details and also age them down a bit. We'll use the Precision Brush Applicator on the Tamiya Thin in order to prepare the belt. We'll put it on both parts so that we get a very strong bond. Just sort of squeeze that in under the hammer and press it in, and we'll move on to our final sub-assembly, the head. I've applied Topaz Skin through the airbrush as a base, and then Pale Skin from Vallejo as a zenithal highlight. That's going to describe our fundamental shapes on the head, give us some shadow recesses under the eyes and cheekbones. And then I'm going to take Reikland Flesh Shade mixed 1:1 with medium and apply that over the entire head. We'll let that settle into the recesses around the sides of the head, and then we'll use the brush to push that away from the top of the head. We don't want any shade up there. Just make sure it falls into the shadow zones. Deep Gray from the Army Painter is then applied to his beard using our Zero brush, and then where we need to be really careful along the mustache and where the facial hair meets the skin, we're using our 000 detail brush. We'll paint that in, and then we're going to do the details on his necklace. We'll apply bronzes to the medallions, some bone whites to the teeth, and then we'll shade those with Agrac's Earthshade. While that dries, we'll apply Nuln Oil straight out of the pot to the beard to bring out the shadow values. And then by this point, the Agrax is dried. We'll go back with that bone white, still wet on our palette, and hit the edges and tips of the teeth to give them contrast and definition. If you look closely, you'll notice I've also hit all of the strands of hair on his beard one at a time with ash gray. With that done, it's time to put it on the model. We use Tamiya Thin on both parts, the head and the join. Press that in, and we're going to put him on his base. We'll paint the base here with Deep Gray. Once that's dry, we'll apply some Nuln Oil to get the detail in our recesses. We're going to let that fully dry about 30 minutes, and then we'll do a light dry brush of ash gray and white to bring out all the highlights and details. Now, I'm going to use super glue gel type to apply the model to the base. That's going to fill in any gaps or imperfections in the surface and make a really strong bond. And at this point, we'd be done. But you know this channel, I can never leave well enough alone. And wouldn't it look cool if there was lightning coming out of his hammer? Let's try a new technique for the first time. using this wire that I found at the dollar store. We'll cut off a small section, apply some super glue, and put that into a very tiny hole that we've drilled into the base. Then, using some tiny needle nose pliers, we'll make twists and bends in the wire to look like an arc of electricity coming off of the hammer. We'll take the other end, apply some super glue to that, and put that into another small hole we've drilled into the edge of the hammer. Now, I did find that it's easier to bend the wire into the shape you want before one end is glued in, so on the other two, that's exactly what I did, and we had something that looked like this. Encouraged by the progress, I went ahead and applied white paint to all of our arcs of electricity. It's just a matter of making sure you get complete coverage, but don't get it anywhere on the model. If you were wondering, yes, that's nerve-wracking, but not as nerve-wracking as making the decision to drill into a complete model in order to do something like this. But if you want the electricity to arc to his front foot, that's what you have to do. We'll apply some electric blue and sort of gradients and waves along it to get some interest here, leaving the white where the sharpest bends and creases are. And with that complete, we're ready to apply our Valhalla Blizzard to finish the model. Well, there you have it, Arjac Rockfist, the Anvil of Fenris, and the leader of our upcoming Wolfguard Terminators, is finished and ready to join our army. I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to help the channel grow, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video with your friends and help drive us to the front page of YouTube. We're hoping to hit 15,000 subscribers during the Summer of the Wolf. If you'd like to help out the channel in other ways, you can always join our Patreon, linked in the description below. Remember that joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server, where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.